The Seventh Doctor.
Who I have to say up front is my favorite. I'm a big fan of Sylvester McCoy's Doctor. But this is also an era where there's a lot of drama and stuff going on behind the scenes. John Nathan Turner desperately wanted to leave the show. He wanted to move on to other projects, and they wouldn't let him. Basically, the BBC execs go, you've got to stick around. You're the only person we know, the only person who wants to tackle Doctor Who. And Sylvester's first season, as much as I love his Doctor, as much as I enjoy the work that comes afterwards, that first Sylvester McCoy season is all over the place in terms of quality, in terms of Sylvester's performance, because he's trying to figure out how his Doctor's supposed to be. It's a very silly season. It doesn't take itself very seriously in places, especially in Time and the Ronnie, which is his first story, but also Delta and the Bannerman, which is kind of, at times, Doctor Who trying to do a science fiction story that's also a 50s musical pastiche. As much as I like to say that Doctor Who can do just about anything, I would stand by. I would hold Delta and the Bannerman as an example of why Doctor Who should probably not try to do a 50s musical pastiche. It doesn't quite work. But, that first season aside, as I said earlier, there's sort of this big trend in kind of 80s popular culture to kind of do deconstructionist takes on these big characters. And also, take them back. And in some ways, when Andrew Cartmel takes over as the show's head writer, he very much felt that we knew too much about the Doctor. We knew he was a Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey. We'd met former students and everything else. He said, I want to make the Doctor a bit darker and more mysterious again. And that was kind of the direction that Sylvester wanted to go into it as well. Sylvester had a background, kind of a slightly comedic background, but was also a serious dramatic actor who had done Shakespeare. With Timothy Dalton, funnily enough, who's also my favorite James Bond, but I digress. And it really becomes in his second and third seasons, just as the show's coming to an end, unfortunately, the show has a big creative bounce back in terms of stories like Remembrance of the Daleks, and particularly that final season, Ghostlight, Curse of Fenric. They're sort of bigger stories. They're really putting the time and the effort in to do not just get the production values and the casting right, but also to get the stories right. It's a show that becomes slightly more darker, a bit more mysterious. Sylvester's Doctor has this kind of darker edge to him. In 1 minute, he's a bit clownish and he can be juggling and all sort of, smiles and laughs, but he's a master manipulator as well. He's a chess player, literally, in The Curse of Fenric. He's literally playing chess against these big ancient evils. In that story, this big ancient evil, he's literally playing a chess game with the fate of the world and his companion and all of the characters we've met across the story at stake. In some ways, it's a kind of a slight return to the Hartnell era's Doctor, but without making him utterly unlikable and utterly unknowable. But the other thing about this era, which is, I think, very sort of important in terms of where New Who will go later, is the character of Ace, played by Sophie Aldred, who comes in at the tail end of Sylvester's first season and really gets to grow and have a character arc throughout the rest of this era, particularly in the trilogy of stories that ends up ending Classic Who, as well as the aforementioned Ghostlight and Curse of Fenric. Survival, which is a big story. Survival in some ways is oddly a template for New Who, because it starts out on a housing estate in a London suburb where strange things are happening, involving Ace, who's a companion from the local area, people in the area, the Master shows up. It's kind of high strangeness alongside, druddom and normality in a weird way. It's basically, as I said, in many ways it's a template for what New Who will do when Russell T Davies comes in 2005. But it's a really attempt to reset the button to get the show back to where it started, get it back to kind of an even keel. And wouldn't you know, just as they're doing that, they pull the plug on the show again. They basically decide that if the show's going to have a future as a franchise, it needs a rest. And in December 1989, the Doctor and Ace literally walk off into the sunset with this wonderful monologue written by Andrew Cartmel. And that's kind of the end for Classic Who for a little bit. But it's in many ways it's my favorite era of the show. It starts off very rocky, but it finds its feet. It becomes a bit more grown up. It takes itself a bit more seriously. There's fun to it, but there's also a slightly darker edge to it. But it's one of the reasons why I just enjoy it. There's something about Sylvester's Doctor I quite like. I think it's the contrasts in his character, that he's slightly clownish, but also a master manipulator. He also sort of a master planner, really. And there's some wonderful hints in his era that gets explored in the spin-off novels and even in the Big Finish audios as well, regarding who the Doctor is and his larger role in terms of the Time Lords. But it's in many ways, as I said, the McCoy era is a slight tragedy in a way, because it bounces back. It's creatively firing on all cylinders, and then they pull the plug on it, and it's really kind of sad.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.